stage Emily, Ron, Meir, Avner. Our panel moderator is Mr. Leo Wentwell, director at the Israeli Project. He has more than 15 years of experience as a political advisor, spokesman, media strategist, and a diplomat. Weintraub started his professional life as a journalist, then went on to spend 5 years in various positions in the Knesset. Later he joined the Israeli Foreign Service. He served in, among other places, in New Delhi, and subsequently in Washington, D.C., where he was chief of staff for 2 ambassadors, and later on a spokesman of the embassy. Leo, pleasure.
Thank you very much, Gilad. I wish my mother was here to hear Gilad share reading my resume. This panel about the perspective on the nuclear some perspective about the nuclear negotiations with Iran in implication to the future, I think is very timely, since 2 years, 4 months, and I think 3 weeks to the signing of this agreement. The evaluation card of this agreement is still to be diplomatic, diverse, ranging from the worst deal ever, as President Trump described it from time to time, to a nuclear agreement that was just supposed to be a nuclear agreement, as we've saw the last exchange here between Meir and Jay. So I think that since when you're looking at Master Google, we see that there are still a lot of bad blood, a lot of emotions and politics out there. This a fresh and maybe analytical or even cold perspective about the negotiation of the JCPOA is not just a word exercise, but also a necessity. So since we have a lot of ground to cover, I'll just introduce our outstanding panel for today. Start with Dr. Emily Landau. Emily Landau is a senior research fellow at the INSS and head of the Armed Control and Regional Security Program, leading its research conference outreach and mentorship project. Dr. Landau has published and lectures extensively on nuclear proliferation, arms control, regional security dynamics in the Middle East. With us today also an institution in the Israeli media, Mr. Ben-Yishai. Ron is currently a senior commentator on national and international affairs and special assignment correspondent for Yediot, Aharonot, and Ynet, its website. In his capacity, Mr. Ben-Yishai deals extensively with matters of Israeli and Middle Eastern regional security, global terrorism, Israeli foreign policy, and international affairs. Also with us, Mr. Meir Javedanfar. Meir teaches a course on contemporary Iranian politics at the IDC, the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, Israel. He is also a senior researcher at the Meir Azari Center for Iran and Persian Gulf Studies. And also Dr. Avner Golov. Dr. Avner Golov is a research fellow and director of research program at the INSS. He is also an Israel Institute doctoral fellow. So welcome all of you, and I'd like to start with you, Emily, with asking you just the concept of negotiation as a tool to deal with a determined proliferator such as Iran.
How long do we have each?
As long as you need, not more than.
We're going to have like a conversation.
You want to do a few rounds. Maybe be able to take some questions from the audience. So as long as you need, not more than 7 minutes.
First of all, I want to say that when we talk about, when we think about whether negotiations can be an effective strategy for dealing with a determined proliferator, and Iran is a determined proliferator, North Korea is as well. Pressure is part of the negotiation. Pressure is what gives the international community leverage in such a negotiation. And therefore, sanctions are not a separate strategy from negotiations. Sanctions, the pressure that comes with sanctions, is part of the negotiation process. So when I talk about negotiations, I'm including all of the pressure from sanctions. And by the way, threats of possible military force are also a lever of pressure that can help a negotiation. So I don't necessarily see these as separate strategies. Of course, actual use of military force is a different strategy. So when we think about whether negotiations can stop a determined proliferator, we need to understand something about the negotiation setup. And in this setup, actually, the proliferator has a huge advantage over the international negotiators. You would think when you look at the P5+1 negotiating with Iran, you would think all the cards are in the hands of the P5+1. These are some of the strongest powers economically, militarily, politically in the world. And they're all up against Iran, who is quite weak in all of those respects. So it would seem that this would be a pretty easy negotiation. You have these guys together facing this much weaker actor, and it shouldn't be that big a challenge to get the proliferator to back down from its nuclear ambitions and to return to the fold of the NPT. But what we see play out in these negotiations actually is almost the exact opposite. The proliferator at the negotiation table has the advantage. Why? Because the proliferator is one state, united, doesn't need to coordinate with other states, knows where it wants to go, and most importantly, doesn't need a negotiated deal. Doesn't need a negotiated deal. In fact, the negotiated deal is the last thing the proliferator wants, because that means they have to give up their nuclear ambitions, which they are loath to do. The international community, on the other hand, in this case P5+1, we're talking about 6 parties who did not see eye to eye on almost anything with regard to the Iranian nuclear challenge. They were not on the same side. They were not united. And the fact that they were not united, Iran noticed that. And by the way, one of their tactics in the negotiation was to play the divide and conquer. They would try to go into those divisions and deepen them. The other problem for the international community is that they were not only wanted a negotiated settlement, they were totally dependent on a negotiated settlement. That was their only way to get the proliferator to back down, because they were not interested in moving to the other strategy, which is military force. And you know, in international relations, when you're dependent on something, dependency spells weakness. So the basic structure of this negotiation is one where actually the proliferator has the stronger hand coming in. And therefore we saw from 2003 up until 2013, for 10 years there were on-again, off-again negotiations. They didn't go anywhere because Iran would say that they'll go to another round of negotiations, but they never wanted them to reach a deal. So they would go through the motions, they would ward off pressure by just saying that they wanted to negotiate, but the negotiations, and there were rounds and rounds of negotiations in those 10 years, never got them to a deal. Everything changed in 2013 with the pressure, and Jay talked about the pressure. It's crucial in this kind of negotiation to give the international community some leverage over the proliferator, which has a stronger hand. And that's why from 2013 we saw a more serious negotiation. The problem was that it was still a game of compellence. There was still no mutual interest, really. There was no mutual interest. And it was still zero-sum. Either Iran keeps its breakout capability or it doesn't. The P5+1 went into the negotiation with the goal of denying Iran a breakout capability. Iran obviously came out with a full breakout capability. They were delayed, up to a year, but they kept their breakout. And what happened, I would say, and with this I'll close for now, what happened in the negotiation is that the P5+1 in the United States in particular continued to play the negotiation as if they were in what I would call a normal political negotiation where there is a mutually desired goal, and the question is the price, and you haggle over the price, each side makes concessions, and you reach the goal. But there continued not to be a mutual goal, and therefore it was actually a hard bargain that they should have been negotiating, and that should have been their negotiating tactic. But they got caught up in this sense that they were in a different negotiation where they needed to make concessions, where there's a give and take. And therefore, once they started making concessions to the Iranians knew that there were more concessions in the pipeline. The Iranians were driving a hard bargain. The P5+1 were negotiating as if they were trying to move towards a common goal. And the end result, of course, is the JCPOA, where the P5+1 did make some very problematic concessions to Iran.
Thank you, Emily. I think now we'll move to maybe Dr. Golov, just since we started on 20,000 feet, maybe you will describe to us a little bit about the winners and losers, and what did we earn and what did we lose in this JCPOA?
Thank you, Leo. So, first, sorry about my voice. I woke up this morning with a voice. I asked my wife, what should I do? She told me, have no other option, you need to be short and to the point. So you're all lucky. First, I would like to stress 2 points that I think influence the negotiation process the most. And I will try to be unconventional. The first one is the lack of coordination and mistrust between the American president and the Israeli prime minister, which I think damaged the American position during the negotiations. And I will give you 2 examples. The first one, until the end of 2013, when the interim agreement was signed, the American assessment, the public American assessment, was that Iran is at least 1 year away from a bomb, stated by the president himself. After the interim agreement was signed, suddenly the American assessment was shifted to 2 to 3 months. Why? Because before the interim agreement was signed, the main threat to the diplomatic efforts was an Israeli unilateral move that Jay implied. It doesn't matter what we think was a possibility of this scenario to realize, but they assess the possibility is very high. After the agreement was signed, the main challenge was how to deal with the opposition domestically, supported by the Israeli opposition to the upcoming deal, and then they shifted to a 2-3 month breakout time in order to justify the agreement that, according to them, extend the breakout time to 1 year. To give you a sense, and everything has been done publicly, and this is my main point, because it was part of the private and intimate discussion between the Israelis and the Americans, it was fine. But everything was done publicly, and I promise you, the Iranians use it in order to improve their position in the negotiation table. Another evidence in the negotiation literature, Gil, correct me if I'm wrong, Batna, this is everything. The best alternative to a negotiated agreement. The better alternative you have outside of the negotiation table, the stronger your position is in the negotiation table. What was the American Batna during the negotiations? Stated publicly by the president again, a regional war in the Middle East. When this is your Batna, your alternative to a negotiated agreement, your position in the negotiation table is not good, to say the least. Almost any agreement is better than this alternative. Again, everything has been done publicly, weakened the American position in the negotiation table. The second factor, not less important, was unwise use of the American leverages during the negotiation, and Emily already implied to it, of economic sanctions and the use of credible military threat. Because diplomacy, this is only one tool. If you want to win the game, you need to play with all the cards that you have. And America had two great cards. We know it because this is what brought the Iranians to the table from the first place. And after the interim agreement, and by the way, and Bogi, you can correct me if I'm wrong, when we discussed it with the Americans in the first place, we were on the same page in the sense that we said big for big deal, not interim agreements, because everybody realized that after the interim agreement is signed, sanctions and credible military threat are going to be out of the table. And the Iranians knew it, and they felt much more comfortable to negotiate with the Americans after the interim agreement. So what we had is an agreement that everybody wants to call it or title it as bad or good. Here in the Institute, in the INSS, we want to have a benchmark, which is better than the two strategic alternatives. One is prevention, even using force as a last resort. And the other one is containment, accepting nuclear Iran. We all should focus on find a third alternative which is better than these two. The JCPOA in the near future, until 2023, up to 2030, it really depends on the Iranian behavior and the international politics, is better than these two alternatives. But afterwards, if Iran uses it wisely, and they will, they can start developing a nuclear program and gradually deploy on the nuclear threshold. De facto can not even break out, just walk out toward nuclear military capabilities, and the world will be able to do nothing about it. So after this year, between 2023 to 2030, we need to follow the Iranian behavior. The agreement would be basically accepting containment, de facto, not better than the two alternatives. What does it mean? This is not for Americans. How many Americans do we have in the audience? So this is for you. It's not football. It's not the Super Bowl. It's not one game you win or you lose. This is sometimes the sense when you read the news. We lost, we won. This is not the game. The game is more like an NBA playoff. There is a next round, and we need to prepare for the next round within 7 to 10 years. And this is our task now, and I would like to elaborate more if I will have it.
Thank you, Avner. The American perspective.
Yes, the American perspective, I have to be the devil's advocate. But genuinely, I believe that having the JCPOA is better than nothing. Which means we are better off having this JCPOA than not having anything else on the map, and Iran either remaining a threshold country or breaking out to the ball. I think that the JCPOA gives us a second chance to mend it, to correct it, or to sign a new agreement with Iran, provided we shall play our cards this time rightly. I think that the JCPOA started with the noble intentions by President Obama and got entangled into an obsession which brought about a very bad agreement. I said it is better than nothing, but I can't ignore the fact that it is a bad agreement, mainly because of the sunset clause at the end of it. All the rest we can tolerate, but the sunset clause at the end of it, makes this agreement a no good. I don't want to use. My English is not good enough to find a nice word for it. The noble cause, the noble intentions by President Obama, and I recognized them when he started with it, because I was in Washington bureau chief. I was Washington correspondent of Yediot Aharonot during Carter's time, then Clinton time. And I remember Carter negotiating with after his tenure, negotiating with North Korea. And Obama reminded me very much of President Carter, ex-President Carter, negotiating with North Korea on their nuclear thing. He also started with wanting to make America's enemies into friends. He started with Venezuela and then was reaching out to Iran and to others. He really wants, he got the Nobel Prize, and I think basically, psychologically, he wanted to justify the Nobel Prize, and that played a role in his wish to get the deal done on a major thing like Iran becoming nuclear or not becoming nuclear, military nuclear power. The second thing that influenced Obama, I think, is his guilt feeling about America being a nuclear superpower. Asking a third world country to stop being a nuclear power. How can we come with clean hands, he used this word, clean hands, to Iran, tell her you cannot become military nuclear power, while we have not only ballistic missiles and not only nuclear warheads for them, but also very sophisticated and other things. And I think that this gave him an inferior position right from the beginning when he started negotiating with Iran. The third thing is, as you said, is the threat of military confrontation. I think that Obama, as a reaction to what happened during Bush time, was horrified by the idea that in his time, in his tenure as a president, the United States will go into a new armed conflict in which Americans will get killed, like in Afghanistan, like in Iraq. He didn't want it to happen. And somehow people convinced him that if the Israelis will attack, as a matter of fact, many Israelis advocated this approach. If Israel will attack, the United States will have no other choice but to join in when it happens, and the United States will have to fight a war that he didn't want to fight. And I think Obama was genuine in his wish not to get into this scenario, into this not vicious circle, but vicious spiral. When he spoke about the danger of a war, regional war, I think partly he meant this thing. Another thing is that Obama somehow, as an ex-social activist in the neighborhoods of Chicago, believed that with diplomacy, you can, if you practice it genuinely and creatively, with diplomacy you can get almost everything. He was a worshipper or believer in diplomacy, and at the end, I think that diplomacy in itself, in the negotiations, became the goal, which means making diplomacy succeed was the end and not stopping the proliferator, as you call it. Another thing, and I think this is almost the last, I think that Obama was fascinated by Iran, the big culture, as opposed to these wild Sunnis, wild nomads in the desert. And here he has a cohesive administration in Iran, someone you can talk to, you can rely on their words. So he preferred to ignore the fact that Iranians cheated all the way, from Natanz through Fordow to Iraq to all these places, and he ignored it because in his mind the Shiites were deprived of their right role in the Middle East. And he said, probably to David Remnick, in an interview he gave to the New Yorker, that the Saudis has to realize that the Iranians have to have their share in power in the Middle East as well. Do you remember this?
Jeff Goldberg.
Yes.
Jeff Goldberg.
Jeff Goldberg? Okay. So Obama was so fascinated by the idea that he will change the power sharing in the Middle East, that he also adhered to the idea of the fatwa that allegedly the supreme leader, Khamenei, issued, and no one saw it. A lot of people told you, in the Shia, it doesn't really matter if it is a written fatwa or a verbal fatwa. So, and Obama and Kerry pushed this idea of the fatwa. The fatwa I'm talking about, the Khamenei saying that having a nuclear bomb is a sin. By the way, there was a fatwa, but by Khomeini, not by Khamenei. And I will finish by saying that Obama really wanted to help Rouhani to get the power, and he believed that Rouhani can bring about a change in Iran, a peaceful change in the society of Iran. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Ron.
I defended the Obama right.
Yes, the
What would you like me to address? The deal, or the need to what is called to fix the deal?
Let's start with the perspective during the negotiation and maybe.
You have a good idea how to fix this.
Yes, I'll put it in the post. Or as Defense Minister Lieberman said when he came to conveying Israel's threats to the Iranians telepathically, I'll send it. Is 5 minutes okay? With Iran and with any other country, and if you can hear me, we cannot talk on absolute terms. We cannot talk on absolute terms. This one's good, this one's bad. It's very difficult, and I think it's rather inaccurate to talk about absolute terms regarding anything. So whatever I'm going to say, it's going to be relative. Relatively speaking, I don't think there has been a president in the post-revolution history of Iran who has understood the Iranian regime better than Barack Hussein Obama. I think the West and in Israel, we have this whole idea of what threatens the Iranian regime upside down. What really threatens the Iranian regime, and I'm the product of the education of the Islamic Republic of Iran for 8 years until the age of 14, where we shouted death to America in the morning and came home breakdance better than the American kids. At the age of 14, I went to London. I knew how to breakdance better than the British kids. Half of them didn't even know. What threatens the Islamic Republic of Iran? I know it's difficult to say in the state of Israel where people have served 3 years in the army carrying a hard weapon. What threatens the Islamic Republic of Iran is soft power. Ladies and gentlemen, believe me, I know it's difficult to say it in this country. Soft power, and they say it, and Iran's rulers say it. And Obama was successful beyond the imagination of anybody because he managed to infiltrate the Iranian regime at the very core of its existence, soft power. The one thing that no Iranian will ever stand for, be it monarchist, revolutionary, communist, is to be brought down on his knees. Ladies and gentlemen, the Iranian regime came to the table in 1988. My family lived through that bloody war for 7 years against Saddam Hussein. We lost a very dear neighbor. I don't want to go into what people lost and what we lost in terms of our belongings, what we had to sell for next to nothing to leave Iran. The only reason Khomeini accepted to drink the chalice of poison was because he knew that the deal would allow him to keep Iran's borders. If Saddam Hussein would have said the deal for peace with Iran means that we keep part of Iran's borders, he would have never agreed to it. And this is why Obama was smart. This is where he started to weaken Khamenei. He told them that we will recognize your right to enrich uranium on your soil. This, the terrible damage to Khamenei's stance and the stance of the Iranian regime in front of its own population and in front of the Russians and the Chinese, who Obama brought on the side of the P5+1. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I beg my Israeli compatriots, speak with a little bit more modesty when we address the fact that Obama managed to bring 5 countries on board, 6 to confront Iran. Just how many countries have we in the state of Israel, in any of our diplomatic relations, managed to convince to join our cause? I think if anything, by the end of tonight, that whatever there was, it's going to be less. But let's not depress ourselves. It was Obama's outreach to the people of Iran, and it was Obama's outreach. People laugh at it in Israel. I'm sorry to say, it was his congratulatory message to the people of Iran. The fact that he says he recognizes the great people of Iran, the civilization of the people of Iran, and the fact he says, I recognize your right to enrich uranium. This is the moment the Iranian regime lost. That's the moment the Iranian regime lost. The Iranian regime lost its greatest leverage, which was before that they want to bring us to our knees. Obama took that away, and that's why we were able to get to where we are with the deal, which, according to the Nuclear Energy Commission of the State of Israel, I'm not sure if we have energy, which is a good deal, believe it or not. The people in the IDF, there was a report in Haaretz that part of the IDF intelligence says, this is a good deal. And you know why it's a good deal, ladies and gentlemen? Because in the realms of possibilities, we were not going to bring the Iranians to zero enrichment. You know what? I would love for the Iranian regime to disappear tomorrow so I can visit my friends and where I was brought up, and we can go and find all those unmarked graves full of thousands of people who the Iranian regime has killed and bring them all into justice. Oh, me and millions of others would like that. But let's be realistic. Let's be realistic. Were we going to bring the Iranian regime to zero enrichment? No. So what did we do? We brought them for 15 years, sunset clause, 15 years where they'll have 300 kilograms of enriched uranium. For those 15 years, the IAEA is going to find out a lot more about the Iranian nuclear program. We're going to keep an eye on what they're doing. There are inspectors at Natanz and Fordo. They turn up every day. They turn up every day. Ladies and gentlemen, there are tourist sites in Iran that don't get foreign visitors every day. Mm-hmm. Now, for us, we may say, well, they're Iranians, they're liars, they want to one thing I heard, and as much as I detest this regime for personal reason, all this racist talk, they're Iranian, they'll never keep a deal. They will come back tomorrow and say, I want to renegotiate it. You can't reach a deal with these Iranians. Guess what? It's a crude joke. They are the ones who are keeping the deal, and guess who is coming back and asking to renegotiate? The deal is working. Let's keep to it, and let's focus on the parts of the Iranian regime which threaten us today, which is Iran's presence in Syria, which is Iran's missile program. The nuclear deal for now has given us time to learn more about Iran's nuclear program, to keep focus on it. Let's give up on all these unicorns that yes, Ayatollah Khamenei would personally have supervised all of Iran's enrichment centrifuges to be put on a truck and shipped abroad. Sure, why are we doing that? Why don't we buy a villa at Herzliya Pituach? I'll end with this very important argument. You know, people said what Bashar al-Assad gave up his nuclear program after a reported strike reported by the Washington Post of the Israeli Air Force. That Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program. Why shouldn't Iran do it? Well, there's a difference. The difference is being nobody knew that Assad had a nuclear program until it was blown up. Nobody knew that Gaddafi, the people of Muammar Gaddafi had not invested so much of his legitimacy in this nuclear program. The Iranian regime has. And I know it sounds like a joke when I say, if you really want to hurt the Iranian regime, speak softly to the people of Iran and respect the regime. Respect this terrible regime. I'm not saying don't condemn their human rights. Do it, and they deserve far more than what you said about what they're doing. But when Obama recognized the Islamic Republic of Iran and the regime as officially representative of whatever it is, despite the fact that it's something we don't like, this hurt the regime more than anything else. Because the revolution has been a spectacular failure. All they have is this anti-American rhetoric. And every time we reach out to them and try to bring them in is when we pose the greatest threat to this bankrupt regime which has been abusing Iran for the last 39 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Meir. There is a lot of avenues for our follow-up. One of them, of course, is the fix in the fix or mix part. And also tightly connected to it is the Trump effect. We are 2 hours or 3 hours from an announcement that is not connected, but it kind of shows about the trajectory that Trump takes in foreign policy. So I'm sure the question whether, as Emily alluded, during the Trump era, the proliferator has the advantage, or as Avner mentioned, the background, the alternative to the background is a regional war doesn't change in the Trump era. So I'm sure, as Ron mentioned, is not afraid or doesn't have guilt for being the world superpower. So what changed in Trump era, or if you wish also to comment on the relation to the North Korea issue. Emily, since you were the most disciplined in time, I think it's fair that you would go first.
Okay. Maybe just quickly a few points in response to Meir, who I think made some important and valid points. For generally looking at U.S.-Iran relations, I'm not sure that they're as helpful when we're looking at the specific challenge of Iran's nuclear ambitions. And that's what we're mainly worried about. By the way, with regard to the P5+1, these are the states that have the responsibility of, they're the guardians of the NPT. So when a state violates the NPT, it goes to the Security Council. So it wasn't really Obama that got them all together. They all had the responsibility.
So why didn't they join during Bush?
No, so I'm saying what I want to say. First of all, they could have done it in Bush's time, but wait, I'll tell you why. The historical record was that there was the Iraq War. It was quite discredited, and no WMD were found. The U.S. was discredited, and so when Iran and North Korea came onto the agenda almost simultaneously at the end of 2002, when they started thinking in 2003 how we're going to deal with them, it was clear it was going to be negotiations, and the 3 European states stepped forward and said, we'll do it, and Bush said, okay, we'll take a back seat. But it is the responsibility of the P5. And by the way, because it was the E3, the Europeans insist until today that it's not P5+1, it's E3+3. And, you know, heaven forfend if in Europe, in a European capital.
The deal if he said you could have it.
What?
I think Bush could have gotten the deal if he said Iran could have an industrial scale nuclear program.
But if he would have done that, there would have been 250 centrifuges, but it didn't. This is why it would have been good to recognize it back then.
Iran is keeping the deal right now, more or less, because it's not a bad deal for Iran. I mean, that's the simple fact. The deal enables Iran to keep its breakout. It's allowed to work on advanced centrifuges, and it got sanctions relief. So, as Jay said,
they shouldn't get anything. They shouldn't get anything for giving up something.
Wait a minute. On the enrichment program, it wasn't 0 or 6,000 centrifuges. When the Americans started talking about the fact that they need to leave some symbolic capability in Iran's hand in the enrichment realm, they were talking about 1,500 centrifuges. That number grew in the months of the negotiations because of the concessions that the United States kept making to Iran. And this was part of the unfortunate dynamic. What I want to say about looking forward, first of all, if strong states in the international community continue to say that the Iran deal is working and that everything is fine and we put the check in the box, the concern is that we have no indication that Iran has made a strategic reversal in the nuclear realm. In other words, according to all indications, they are still motivated to achieve at some point a military nuclear capability. And if that is the case, then in the next years, whether it's 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, if everyone is like, okay, the deal's working, everything's fine with Iran, and Iran gets stronger regionally, which it's doing already, economically because of the sanctions relief, and as far as its nuclear infrastructure, because it's working on advanced centrifuges, because it's working on its missile program almost unhindered, in 8 to 10 years, because of the realities of international politics, Iran will be virtually unstoppable. There will be nobody that has the political will or ability to stop Iran in 8 to 10 years if we're talking about a stronger Iran. Again, regionally, economically, and in terms of its nuclear infrastructure. And that will happen if the international, or the strong actors in the international community today take their eye off that ball and say, okay, the deal's working, it's, we've got it, they're delayed for some time, we're all fine. Because Iran is continuing to do everything it can to move forward and to position itself as best it can to be able to move to that military capability at a time of its choosing down the line. And that's the concern, and that's why we need to focus on strengthening the deal today. Now, the Trump administration said clearly, Trump said it in his speech, I'm not looking right now to do away with the deal. I'm not looking to leave the deal. We need to strengthen the deal. And this needs cooperation from allies, global allies, Middle Eastern allies, and from Congress, frankly, if he wants to change legislation. But he was talking about strengthening the deal. Now, there is some shift in the debate in France. There's a shift. Macron made very important statements that suddenly, the missile program is a big problem. 2025, what are we going to do when sunset? And by the way, Iran is acting in the region in ways that we don't see it to be very positive or conducive. In the internal American debate, there are shifts. Strong supporters of the deal are now saying, yes, the deal has these problems, but what I would say today, and I wrote Avner and I wrote an op-ed on this that was published several weeks ago, and what we advocated there in going forward, what we can do in the unofficial realms, in the public domain, is to try to get conversations going where we focus on those problems, where we stop, the heated and really heated debate between supporters and critics, and we say, okay, look, ballistic missiles are a problem, we all agree. Inspections at military facilities are a problem, we can agree on that. Sunset provisions are a problem, we can agree on that. And get together and leave all the baggage behind, focus on the problem, and try to think of ways to help the administration strengthen the deal. and there are things that can be done. All the confidentiality rights that Iran was granted under the JCPOA, and Jay wrote about these things. We only know certain things because of things that Jay wrote and others that were doing investigative journalism. These side deals with the IAEA, there's no justification for them to be confidential. They need to be open to the public domain and to public scrutiny. Iran is a violator of the NPT. This has been proven. We have the IAEA report. It's no longer something with a question mark. There's an exclamation point. Iran is an NPT violator. It's a state that lost the trust of the international community. It needs to build up that trust. And certainly it shouldn't be granted confidentiality in a manner that doesn't allow us to scrutinize. The reports of the IAEA need to go back to being those full reports with all the critical data that we need to know in order to assess what's going on with IR-6, what's going on with IR-8, with these advanced centrifuges. There are questions whether everything that Iran is doing is, what it's supposed to do according to the deal. With regard to the military facilities, there are ambiguities in the wording of the JCPOA. People can sit down together and say, okay, the wording is ambiguous. Let's see how we can strengthen these mechanisms. So I think there's a lot that can be done that's not about opening it up for renegotiation, which is not a good idea because there's no leverage to renegotiate. Iran does not want to renegotiate, that's clear. But to get together the U.S. and some of its allies to try to do these things to strengthen the deal.
Thank you, Emily. A word about North Korea?
Well, yeah, North Korea is there. It's out there for everyone to see what happens when you rely solely on diplomacy and negotiations, and when a state becomes a nuclear state, and even though the United States refuses to say that North Korea is a nuclear state, it is a nuclear state. It can lob a nuclear missile on its neighbors, and it will soon be able to do so on the mainland of the United States. And once a state is a nuclear state, you can't denuclearize it. It won't work. And so all the talk about denuclearization, I think, is missing the mark. It's now moving to deterrence. It's a bad situation. It's unstable. But that's what happens when you keep thinking that diplomacy is going to work and the final deal is just around the corner. And so North Korea is there as a lesson for us to understand that diplomacy isn't, and negotiations are not a magic word. Okay, we want to get a deal through negotiations, but it's going to take pressure. It's going to take ongoing pressure. It's going to be a long process. It won't be easy. We need to look at all of these factors. If Iran crosses the threshold, unfortunately, it will be game over for Iran as well, and I think a nuclear Iran will pose a much more complicated challenge even than a nuclear North Korea.
Thank you.
In terms of fixing the deal, whether we can get the Iranians to fix the deal, allow me to tell you a joke. During his presidency, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was sitting in his car in the convoy. The car breaks down, they have a puncture. President Ahmadinejad says to everybody, stand aside, I'm the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, I will fix this. So he gets out of the car, and to the amazement of his bodyguards and everybody, he gets on his hands and knees, and he goes to the exhaust pipe, and he starts blowing in the exhaust. And everybody's looking at him, what is he, crazy? What is he doing? So his right-hand man, Esfandiar Rahim Mashai, who could be soon put in jail, comes and looks at him. He says, Mr. President, what are you doing? He says, well, the car's got a puncture. I'm trying to blow up the tire. I'm blowing in the exhaust pipe. He says, oh my God, that's not the way to fix a puncture. God, no wonder people say you don't know what you're doing. No wonder you're embarrassing us, Mr. President. This is so wrong. This is not the way you fix a puncture. So he says, so how am I supposed to do it? He says, you roll up the car windows first, and then you blow in the exhaust pipe. Trying to address what Iran is doing wrong through fixing a nuclear deal is like blowing in the exhaust pipe to fix the puncture. It's not going to happen. Why? First and foremost, if you want to get Iran to take notice, as Jay quite rightly said, you need to impose the SWIFT sanctions and the sanctions against the the central bank, which is the one thing. It's not going to happen because we're not going to wreck the deal. Because if you do that, you break the deal. So let's not kid ourselves. We do not have the leverage, that key leverage, to force the Iranians to renegotiate the deal. Number one. That's the most important thing. Number two, the Europeans will not back the new sanctions. It's not going to happen. Why? Because whether we like it or not, and I know there are many dear colleagues who don't like it, the IAEA says that Iran is abiding by the deal. And the IAEA has inspectors on the ground, whereas we or our American partners and everybody else does not. And they're saying Iran is living up to its part of the deal. So the Europeans are not going to... Is President Trump going to go into a trade war against the Europeans to force them? Let's be honest, that's not going to happen. Next, China and Russia are not going to back it. Is President Trump going to go to a trade war with the Chinese to tell them, if you don't impose sanctions on Iran, you can't do business with American companies? That's not going to happen either. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not realistic. The deal is done. Let's focus on it. We're not going to get the Iranians to renegotiate. No part of it. You know what? I have to end with this point. I owe Emily an apology, and I have to explain why. No, I have to be honest. I have to clean my conscience. Before the deal, I told her that if the PMD is not addressed, I will not back it. The PMD, the Iranians did not own up to the PMD, and I did back the deal. Do you know why, Emily? Do you know how I live with my conscience? No. No. Because the fact exists is that the military sites are open to inspections. Ladies and gentlemen, there has not been one, please, any member of the audience. You can call a family member if you wish. Show me one report where after the JCPOA, it has been requested to go to a military site, and Iran has turned it down. Because nobody has requested. Once Iran requests and it says no, then you can't. But if you look at the text of the deal, and this was one of the red lines of the Ayatollah Khamenei, militaries that they should not be included, they are included. I think this is one of the ways that people are trying to delegitimize the deal, and I think it's wrong, and it's to be honest, it's not the right thing to do. The military sites are included in the deal. Well, check the text.
The problem is of the undeclared.
Any site in Iran, if it's deemed to be holding a military fissionable material, can be accessed to in 21 days. 24 days. The half-life of uranium is 300 million years. If there's any trace, I think within those 24 days we'll find. Well, it's a fact.
Thank you, Meir.
I happen to agree with Meir on almost everything except for the last point you made about visiting military sites. This is not, you are wrong on this. But let me go.
Based on what? Based on what?
Based on
even Aharonot.
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail, that's right. The Ten Commandments if you go down the mountain.
Let me not get into an argument about this point because I have another point that I want to make, and you might chime in for trespassing my time. In order to make my point, I want to go back to 2003, when Rouhani stopped Iran's military activity concerning nuclear program, because he was afraid that the Americans that came near, that are in Iraq, will act against him.
It's Khamenei, not Rouhani. Rouhani that doesn't have the power.
Rouhani, I think, was the
Khamenei.
So this is a point that should be noticed. And I think that the deal, the JCPOA, is a done deal, and there is nothing to do about it. The only thing that we can make together with the Trump administration is develop a military option that will apply both to North Korea and to Iran and to any other possible proliferator that will appear. And when I'm talking about military option, I'm talking about active defense and aggressive means in order to pose a real threat to any either active proliferator or potential proliferator. I mean, everything that can deter such a proliferator. That's the only thing that can be done. Viable, a credible military option built of many elements in order to deter them. That's the only thing. And readiness to use it. I think that one of Obama's main mistakes was his behavior when he realized that Syria is using chemical weapons against its own citizens. And Obama made a threat, and he didn't realize from that on, when he said all options are on the table, it was clear that not all options are on the table, that only diplomacy is the option on the table, and the Iranians understood it better than anybody else.
But the Republican Congress stopped them from attacking the Syrians after the chemical weapons attack.
I don't think that the Republican Congress stopped them. I think that the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Armed Forces could order his Air Force. Because he wanted them to stop
they're
the
also responsible. The Republicans are also responsible.
Only viable military option. This is the only thing that we can do now, and Obama administration is a partner.
Thank you, Juan.
So, by the way, in Israel we are bipartisan. We blame both Republicans and Democrats. If Meir is right, and Obama touched the most sensitive veins in the Iranian regime, on nerves, the diplomatic failure is even greater. Because how come we end up with these sunset clauses, with ending the military embargo without even conditioning it on the Iranian behavior? Military embargo is nothing nuclear. You will weaken the UN resolution regarding the missile activities. So I always listen to it and I think this also only highlights the diplomatic failure here. But as I said, for now, we are in a good place for the next 7 to 10 years, maybe a little bit more. And we need to think about the next round, because this is improving the deal, fixing the deal. These are the issues: sunset clauses, UN resolution, the end of the military embargo. Maybe the UN resolution can be dealt today. I think Europe is more attentive today to deal with the missile problem. But fixing the deal per se, this is not a mission for 2017. This is something for 2023 and northward, 25 or even 30. But we must start the coalition building today.
Can I say one thing on the BNB?
Yes.
What you were saying? Because after the CPOA was signed, they went back into party. And they did find it. And then I think at that point, the IAEA usually is by their manual, they should go back and say, why are we finding uranium? And they never did it. And they still haven't asked.
Because the PMD is separated from the JCPOA, that's the problem. And I agree with you, that's the problem.
But you're saying access to sites.
So they got access to sites.
But
And they found something.
And they found something, and they've never asked, and they've never asked to go after it. And I think they haven't asked because they know that will cause crisis. And so do you cause it now, or do you,
And that's what's been.
or do you wait and try to build some?
I think that was the whole point of separating the PMD. As much as I agree with it, that's the whole point of okay, let's
I'm
what happens
just
before going
questioning
forward.
the access because they haven't tested that proposition.
Exactly.
They went in, they found something, and they didn't ask to
No,
go
what
back.
he's saying is, Meir, that they're not requesting access because they expect that this will cause a
I understand.
confrontation with Iran.
So, I
And
mean,
this
when you
is
were saying
exactly what's been
they have
reported.
access, and I'm questioning that.
Well,
Jay, so I have a boss, General Amidor, when he was my boss,
Yeah.
and we told him we need to find the smoking gun. And he told us, you can bring the gun, the Prime Minister will decide if it's a smoking gun or not. This is exactly it. As long as you have the political will, you can do it. If you don't have the political will, I think this is your main point here, you can bring all the guns that you want, it's not going to be used as a smoking gun. But I want to take you looking forward now. I think we should start the coalition building efforts today. This is Trump's mission, but for Israel, from an Israeli point of view, we should avoid this public dispute again with this president or other president in the future. And the foundation for the American strategy should be, I have the honor to work with General Yadin here. We came with a concept of parallel agreement because Israel is not a party of the JCPOA. So Israel and America should make sure they're on the same page, regardless of the administration, but defining the violations, the responses for these violations, devise intelligence campaign, and I'm sure General Yadin will elaborate more later. I don't want to steal the show.
But you are talking of building a coalition, and I don't understand coalition to do what?
Start working together first to build. I was going to explain it later. First,
in accordance to our
first deal with, I always tell a joke, so in my service I've been told never be, don't be a yes man. If your boss says no, you should also say no. First deal with the missiles, I think this coalition test will be the missiles, and then if it's strong enough, you can, within 5, 7, 10 years, go and address the nuclear issue. But I want to end with the North Korea. Because I don't think we understand, we have a good understanding of the implication of the North Korean problem on the Iranian issue. One of the problems that I don't think fixing the deal is a mission for 2017 is North Korea. Because North Korea is going to take most of the resources and attention of this administration, whether they want it or not. Period. And in Israel, we need to understand that even if we will convince this president that Iran, this is a main threat to the world, he is going to be very attentive to what is happening eastward in Northeast Asia. I'm not sure how many resources, not talking about the will, that he has to deal with Iran in the Middle East. So we need to pick our fights. As someone who is married 7 years. We need to pick our fights. I think when Iran is looking on what's happening with North Korea, this is double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, they understand they are not North Korea. North Korea has nuclear weapons, they do not. Nuclear weapons equals immunity against American intervention, military intervention. They don't have it. So they need to be much more cautious, especially after the frustration of this administration from what is happening in North Korea and the American public. North Korea is going to be a potential, not even potential, if you read between the lines, proliferator of nuclear knowledge in the Middle East. We should accept it. Maybe we've seen it in the past. And we are going to see it more in the future. And the last lesson that I got from this, from the North Korea crisis so far, Just think about it. Today we are not talking about nuclear capabilities, not about nuclear weapons, about range of missiles. Separating missiles from the nuclear issue, it's artificial. Missiles are part of the nuclear problem. If you want to deal with the nuclear problem, you need to deal with the missiles. Thank you.
Thank you. Meir, you wanted to respond? Just and then we can open the floor for
You know what?
question. You don't? So we want to.
You know what? I'll give up my time. I'll
Okay, so
So let's open the floor for. Yes, please.
I think the discussion is interesting, but I think there is one thing missing because Iran doesn't look at the nuclear as a target. It's just the capability to get to other targets. The target is hegemony all over the Middle East and deterring the United States from interfering. And this target is being accomplished with the deal for the time being. She's using Daesh, the fight against Daesh, to take a lot of the influence around the Middle East. While she's doing it, she's also using the agreement and all the norms of keeping agreements that she's talking about now to get ahead and be prepared for the moment that she go on take the capability of nuclear if she needs it, like Emily said. And the problem is that we are differentiating between these two sides. We have to look at Iran from one side only. What is her aim? Where is she going and how is she doing it? And the problem is that the aim includes us as Israelis. There's also other interests of the world. And we have, if we want to stop her, we have to take a wider look and not only deal with the agreement and how to change the agreement and not change. This is one remark. The other one is everything.
This is comment, not short.
The other remark is 2 months ago, all the things that was said here about the agreement, how Iran is taking him and nothing is going to change, the Europeans are not going to move, nobody is going to change this, nobody is going to give sanctions. All of this was 2 months ago, until President Trump decided to decertify not certifying that Iran is keeping the deal. Why? Because he took the wide look of asking himself, what is Iran doing wider, not only in the nuclear, also in the regional, and what is the interest of the United States? And when he said and when he said it, since then, everybody, all the actors, including Iran, is moving in their chairs. Why? Because it was comfortable. The chair was comfortable.
Can I just make one point here? When we talk about sunset clause, there's a very important sunset clause set by another country, which I'd like you all to remember. And that sunset clause is set by the country of China. By 2030, China is not going to allow diesel fuel cars to be run on its street. That sunset clause is one of the most dangerous sunset clause facing the Islamic Republic of Iran. Ladies and gentlemen, what's Iran's biggest export? Oil. What's the second biggest export? Gas. What's the third biggest export? Carpets, pistachios. In 2030, what is Iran going to export? All these foreign adventures, how is Iran going to finance them? This is why the Iranians are angry at Mohammed bin Salman, despite all the bad things that he's doing in Yemen. He's woken up, he's diversifying the economy away from oil. The Iranians, with the massive brain drain that is in Iran, with the terrible way they've treated foreign investors before, who is going to invest in Iran's non-oil sector? That is not happening. That is the sunset clause that the Iranians will have to wonder and to think about and to worry about, because that is a serious threat for a regime which survives so much on the export of gas and oil. The world is going towards beyond oil. Cities are putting deadlines on the use of fuel, and Iran has got zero plans to diversify its economy away from oil. Mr. Rouhani would like to put it in, but as we know, the government in Iran is sometimes for, let's just put it for artificial purposes. You know, it's nice to look at, they can't do much.
Thank you, Meir. Friends, our time is up. I'd like to thank our...
About the future, I think the way about the future is to try to tie
the Iranian nuclear program with a civilian cause. They do not have any. So whatever they do must be used for civil uses. Please remember, we don't have time now, but this is the only thing that can really unite the United States plus Europe. There is no use for 6,000 centrifuges, neither for 10,000 centrifuges. If you have one reactor, and this reactor cannot be fueled by your own fuel. So there must be a connection and a condition between the civil users and what kind of enrichment they have in the country.
Thank you. So I said I come up. I'd like to thank our marvelous panelists for a sizzling discussion. I thank all of you for participating and listening.